The night was supposed to be about celebration. My cousin Lily's wedding was the talk of the town, an elegant affair in the lavish halls of the Grand Oaks estate, a venue known for its grandeur. Yet, as I stood in the midst of the extravagant ballroom, all I could think about was how much I hated being there. The shimmering chandeliers above felt like a mockery as they reflected my quiet discomfort. The faces around me, shiny, polished, and smiling, seemed so far removed from the years I had spent grinding, building something from nothing. "Clara, there you are." My mother's voice broke through my reverie. I turned to face her. She gave me that familiar once-over, eyes sweeping my modest dress as if I was the one who had made a mistake. "Why aren't you mingling? Everyone's been asking about you." "I'm fine, Mom," I said, trying to hide my discomfort behind a polite smile. "Just enjoying the evening." She huffed, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at my dress. It was a simple navy blue gown, understated on purpose. No need to stand out among the glittering crowd when they couldn't even be bothered to notice what was truly worth celebrating. "Well, busy doesn't always mean successful, darling," she sighed, her voice tinged with the same judgment she always used. "Look at Lily, youngest CEO in her family's company, and now she's married to someone even more successful. That's what real success looks like." I took a slow sip of champagne, trying to push down the rising tide of frustration. The more she spoke, the more I thought about the meeting I had just led that morning, the merger I had negotiated between two of the largest companies in the region, a deal worth millions. If they only knew, but of course, they didn't. They never asked, they never cared enough to understand. A flicker of a smirk crossed my face, but I quickly masked it. "Lily's doing well," I said, coolly, "and I'm keeping busy, like I said. The firm keeps me occupied." Her eyes narrowed, disapproving. "Busy isn't the same as successful, Clara. And look at Lily. She's got a future ahead of her, a real one. Your little consulting job, well, it's cute. But darling, you could be doing so much more." I was already done with the conversation. I wasn't here to get her approval. But it stung. I had spent years trying to prove that my hard work was worth something, and here they were acting like none of it mattered. I knew they had no idea that the firm they thought I worked for was actually one of the most successful consulting firms in the country. "Clara!" A loud voice cut through my thoughts. It was my brother Jack, always so eager to make his presence known. He swaggered over, his arm draped over his girlfriend Rachel. She giggled, a sound as fake as her smile. "Jack told me all about your little consulting gig, Clara. It's so adorable that you're trying to build something on your own." I forced myself to stay calm, but I couldn't help but remember how it used to be. Jack had always been the golden child, the popular one, the one who did just enough to get by, riding on the coattails of the family connections, while I was the one pushing myself to do something real, to make a name for myself in an industry that didn't give handouts. "Poor Clara," Jack continued, his voice rising for those around us to hear. "Still working for that tiny firm while the rest of us are out here building real careers. But hey, at least you can say you're independent, right?" I could feel the weight of my grandmother's watch against my wrist, a silent reminder that I was capable of more than any of them could comprehend. Rachel adjusted her hair and laughed. "Oh, Jack, be nice. Not everyone can be as successful as you." I stayed silent, my fingers gripping my glass as I stared at the floor. My mind was racing, thinking about how far I had come while they had all been busy celebrating Jack's success and dismissing my efforts. I wanted to scream, to tell them everything they didn't know, but I held back. Instead, I said softly, "Success comes in many forms, Jack." He waved me off. Sure. You're probably right, Clara. Speaking of success," Jack's voice grew louder, his smug grin spreading across his face. "Did you hear? The CEO of Sterling Industries is actually here tonight, Mr. Harrison himself. He doesn't show up to just any event, but hey, for me, he's made an exception. I froze. I knew exactly who Mr. Harrison was. He was the very CEO I had been negotiating with for the merger of the year, the very deal that was about to change everything for both of us. "That's great, Jack," I said, my voice carefully measured. "Try not to embarrass yourself when he arrives." Jack looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" Before I could answer, the doors opened and Mr. Harrison stepped in, his presence commanding attention. He walked across the room with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of. I straightened up as he approached, my mind already shifting into business mode. "Miss Mitchell," he called out, his face lighting up as he made his way toward me. "I didn't expect to see you here, but I'm glad I did." Jack's face went pale. He looked back and forth between Mr. Harrison and me, unable to understand what was happening. "I didn't know you were related to Jack," Mr. Harrison continued, extending his hand to me with a smile. "I suppose you didn't. Jack's family, after all, never really asked me about me. But it's nice to meet you in person, Mr. Harrison. I'm sure this is a lovely event for you." Jack's jaw dropped as the recognition hit him. "Wait, is this your boss?" I nodded, watching as the color drained from Jack's face. "Yes, Jack. I'm the CEO of Aurora Consulting, and it's been a pleasure working with Mr. Harrison." The room went silent, the air thick with the weight of the truth that Jack had never bothered to learn. Before the tension could get too thick, I turned to the camera, speaking directly to my audience. "You know, for years I hid my true potential to avoid feeling like an outsider. I let people like Jack think that they were the ones with the real success. But here's the thing. I didn't wait for validation. I didn't rely on anyone but myself to build something that mattered. If you're feeling underestimated, unappreciated, or invisible, I want you to know this. Your success is coming, and it's going to be so much sweeter when you're the one who built it. So if you're ready to stop hiding and start taking control of your life, hit that subscribe button now and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Trust me, your breakthrough is just around the corner." The next few moments felt like a surreal dream. I could almost hear the whispers ripple through the crowd as Mr. Harrison shook my hand. Jack, standing frozen with disbelief, was trying to process the turn of events. He must have felt his world tilt, watching the truth unfold in front of him. How his sister, the one he had belittled and ignored, was the very person behind the most important deal of his company's future. I held my ground, not allowing myself to show even a flicker of triumph. This wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about finally being seen for who I really was. The family that had overlooked me for years could no longer deny my success, no longer dismiss the woman I had become. "Clara," Jack's voice was soft, almost desperate. "I had no idea you were involved in all this. All these years He trailed off, unable to find the words. I could see the shame in his eyes, but there was no room for sympathy. Not now. I turned back to Mr. Harrison, who was still smiling warmly, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "It's always a pleasure to work with someone who truly understands the value of a well-negotiated deal," I said, maintaining a composed expression. "I'm glad we could finally meet in person." Mr. Harrison nodded, clearly impressed. "I think we both know this merger will shape the future of the industry, Clara. Let's continue our discussions in the next few weeks. I'm looking forward to what we'll achieve together." "Absolutely," I replied, my voice steady. "It's an exciting time." I knew Jack and my parents were watching from the sidelines, but I didn't care anymore. Their approval no longer mattered. What mattered was the future I was building, not for them, but for myself. And for once, it felt good to be the one in control. The room began to buzz with conversation again, the awkward tension hanging in the air like an unspoken truth. As I walked past Jack and the others, I could feel their eyes on me. It was like I was finally becoming the person I had always wanted to be, the one they had never seen, the one they had dismissed for so long. As I made my way toward the exit, I didn't look back. I wasn't interested in their hollow apologies or their attempts to make amends. I had built something far greater than they could ever understand, and I didn't need their approval to keep moving forward. The following weeks were filled with the whirlwind of corporate meetings and family drama. I knew my family wouldn't just let this go. They would try to reach out, to apologize, to somehow convince me to come back into the fold. But I wasn't interested in their version of reconciliation. I had fought too hard to get here to let them think they could rewrite the story. My phone buzzed constantly with texts and voicemails. Mom trying to be the peacekeeper. Clara, darling, let's talk. We need to clear the air. Dad trying to maintain control. We need to discuss your position at the firm. And Jack, his messages increasingly frantic. I need to understand, Clara. I've been so wrong. But I ignored them all. I didn't have time for their guilt trips or their false apologies. I had a merger to complete, and that's where my focus remained. The morning of the board meeting, I stood in my office on the top floor of Aurora Consulting's headquarters. The room was sleek and modern, filled with the kind of quiet power that mirrored my own transformation. Gone were the days of trying to fit into a mold that never suited me. Gone were the days of letting my family's expectations dictate my worth. Today, I wore a tailored black Armani suit, one that commanded attention. It wasn't just about appearance. It was about the message I was sending to everyone who had ever underestimated me. Miss Mitchell, the board is ready for you, Emma, my assistant, said, poking her head into my office. I nodded, glancing at the sleek timepiece on my wrist. It was time. I straightened my jacket and made my way to the conference room, my heels clicking against the polished floor. As I entered the room, I noticed the 15 board members who had gathered, their eyes immediately locking onto me as I walked to the head of the table. Mr. Harrison, standing at the front, greeted me with a respectful nod. Miss Mitchell, thank you for joining us. Shall we begin? I nodded, taking my place at the table. The room was silent, all eyes on me. For the next hour, I presented my plans for the merger in clear, concise terms, department by department, position by position. I spoke with the confidence of someone who had already done the hard work, who had built a company from the ground up and wasn't afraid to make the necessary changes. When I concluded, the room was still. Some members nodded appreciatively at the bold moves I was suggesting, while others sat in stunned silence. The changes I was proposing would not only restructure Sterling Industries, but would also set the stage for a new kind of business model, one based on merit, not connections. No more favoring those who had the right last name or the right connections. This would be a company where people were valued for what they brought to the table, not for who they knew. The glass walls of the boardroom allowed me to catch a glimpse of my family standing in the waiting area. I saw Jack, his head buried in his hands, his posture defeated. My parents stood rigid, staring at me in silence. Finally, they were beginning to realize the magnitude of what I had accomplished, but it was too late for them to change anything. After the meeting ended, Mr. Harrison approached me, a satisfied smile on his face. Brilliant presentation, Clara. I think we're going to do great things together. Though I have to ask, your brother's position, that will be handled fairly, correct? I didn't hesitate. Yes, if Jack is willing to work for it, there's a place for him. Entry-level sales. He'll have to prove himself, just like everyone else. I looked at him evenly. This isn't about revenge, Mr. Harrison. This is about building something real, something lasting. As I gathered my papers and made my way toward the exit, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to please anyone. I wasn't looking for anyone's approval. I had created this future on my own. The following days were exactly as I had expected. The storm of messages from my family didn't stop. My phone buzzed constantly with new texts, voicemails, and missed calls from my mother, my father, Jack, and a few other distant relatives who had never really paid attention to me unless I was the subject of their ridicule or pity. Now that the truth about my position in the business world was out, they wanted to be a part of my success. They wanted to fix what they had broken, to somehow ease the guilt they were no doubt feeling. Each message was more urgent than the last. Clara, darling, please, let's talk. We've learned so much from this. Don't let it be the end. I've been thinking about what happened. Please, let's make amends. The same people who had dismissed my work, my dreams, and my very existence just weeks ago were now desperate to be part of the success they had ignored for so long. But I didn't respond. Not a single one. The realization was simple. I had outgrown them. The family that once had been everything to me now seemed small, fragile, and insignificant. They were not going to be the ones who dictated my future anymore. My future was mine to build, brick by brick, with my own hands. I had never been a stranger to hard work. From the moment I started Aurora Consulting, I had sacrificed everything. I had poured my soul into that company, working 18-hour days, sacrificing weekends, holidays, and personal moments to ensure it thrived. I had built it from nothing, with no safety net, no handouts, and certainly no family cheering me on. They had never understood the sleepless nights, the constant hustle, and the isolation that came with building something real from the ground up. But now that it was a billion-dollar company, now that it was thriving beyond anyone's wildest imagination, they finally wanted to be a part of it. And they didn't deserve that chance. They hadn't earned it. They never took the time to understand the effort behind my success. They just assumed I was small time, something to be dismissed in favor of Jack's shiny, hand-given promotions. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to let their empty apologies or their feigned remorse change the course of my life. I wasn't going to let them have a say in how I moved forward. I took a deep breath, looking out from my office window at the city below. The skyline was vast, sprawling, much like my dreams had once been. But unlike that vastness, my family's approval was no longer a necessary part of my world. It had never been. Not really. As the CEO of Aurora Consulting, I didn't need anyone's permission to be successful. I had fought for everything I had, and I knew that I didn't need their validation to prove that I was worthy of my place in the world. I had built something bigger than any of them could have ever imagined, and none of them had been there to witness it, except perhaps to criticize from the sidelines. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my mother. Clara, please, we need to talk. Let's start over. This isn't just about us, it's about family. I stared at the screen for a long time, my finger hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to respond. I wanted to finally make her understand what she had put me through, how her actions had made me feel insignificant, like I didn't matter. But I didn't. I wasn't going to waste my energy on apologies that came too late. I set my phone down on the desk and I let out a long, steadying breath. Then I got back to work. There was no time for distractions. The merger with Sterling Industries was coming to a close and the board members were eager to finalize the deal. As I reviewed the last details of the contract, I could already hear the voices of those who had doubted me, those who thought they knew what was best for me. They didn't. They never had. The following day, I stood in my office as I adjusted my suit jacket. It wasn't the simple navy dress I had worn at the wedding. It wasn't a dress at all. Today, I was wearing a black Armani suit tailored to perfection, sharp and professional. It was a statement that I was no longer the girl who had hidden in the corners of family events, trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. As I walked toward the boardroom, My heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing in the quiet hallway. When I entered the room, all eyes turned to me. 15 pairs of eyes. 15 board members, all seasoned professionals who knew the stakes and were eager to see the final terms. Mr. Harrison, always calm, always composed, was standing at the front of the room waiting for me to speak. "Ms. Mitchell," he greeted me warmly and nodded his head. "Thank you for joining us. Shall we begin?" I nodded, taking my place at the head of the table. The air was thick with anticipation. The merger was a big deal, a game changer for both companies, but I wasn't nervous. I had prepared for this moment for years. The next hour would be a masterclass in corporate restructuring. Everything from department by department to position by position. I laid it out clearly, making the bold moves I knew had to be made. By the end of my presentation, the room was split. Some members were nodding their approval, impressed by the clarity and scope of the changes I was proposing. Others looked stunned, as if they couldn't believe what they had just heard. The truth was that the old ways of doing business, favoring connections over competence, were over. I glanced toward the glass walls of the boardroom. Through them, I could see my family standing in the waiting area. They were watching. I saw Jack's posture slumped, his head buried in his hands. My parents stood rigid, their faces tight with disbelief. For the first time in years, they were finally understanding the scope of my achievements. They were finally seeing me for who I truly was. Not the disappointment, not the afterthought, but the woman who had created something real. As the meeting wrapped, Mr. Harrison approached me. "Brilliant presentation, Clara," he said, his voice filled with respect. "I think we're going to do great things together. Though I have to ask, your brother's position, that will be handled fairly, correct?" I looked him in the eye and replied without missing a beat. "Yes. If Jack is willing to work for it, there's a place for him. Entry-level sales. He'll have to prove himself just like everyone else." Mr. Harrison raised his eyebrow. "You're more generous than many would be in your position." I said, "This isn't about revenge. This is about building something lasting, something real." I walked out of the boardroom and into the waiting area where my family was still standing. Jack was the first to speak. "So that's it? Everything changes just like that?" I looked at him, my expression calm but resolute. "Everything changed years ago, Jack. You just didn't notice because you were too busy looking down on me." I turned to my parents who were still standing there in silence. "The company will be sending over new employment contracts tomorrow. I suggest you read them carefully." "Clara, please," my mother stepped forward, her voice shaking with emotion. "We were wrong about you. We were so wrong. Can't we start over?" I paused for a long moment, my eyes meeting hers. All the dinners where they had ignored my accomplishments, all the times they had celebrated Jack's trivial victories while brushing aside my milestones, they were still fresh in my mind. Starting over would mean forgetting the past, and I don't want to forget. Those years of dismissal and disrespect taught me valuable lessons. They made me who I am today. My father spoke up, his voice soft. "And who are you now, Clara?" I looked at him one last time. "I'm the woman who built a billion-dollar company while you were all too busy mocking my little firm. I'm the CEO who just acquired the company you thought was the pinnacle of success. And I'm the daughter who finally stopped seeking your approval and found her own path instead." I turned away and started walking toward the elevator. Before the doors closed, I paused and looked back one final time. "The contracts will be here tomorrow," I said. "Your choice whether to sign them or not. But either way, things will never go back to how they were." As the elevator doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of my family. They stood there, in the waiting room of the company I had built. finally seeing me clearly for the first time. Now, I want to ask you, what's stopping you from taking control of your own life? Maybe you've been overlooked, underestimated, or told you weren't good enough. Maybe your family, your friends, or society have tried to tell you who you should be. But just like me, you have the power to define your own path. You have the power to reshape your life. It's time to stop waiting for validation and start building the future you deserve. If you've been inspired by this story or if you've learned something valuable today, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Share this video with someone you know who needs to hear this message of empowerment and self-reliance. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. What lessons have you learned from this story? Comment below and let's start a conversation. Remember, the only approval that matters is your own, and your success is in your hands.